On the evening of April 14th, 1865, as the soft glow of gaslights illuminated Ford's Theatre in Washington, D.C., the air was thick with anticipation. The crowd, still jubilant from the recent Union victory in the Civil War, eagerly awaited the arrival of their beloved President Abraham Lincoln. Little did they know that this night would forever alter the course of American history. The theatre, located on 10th Street NW, had been a popular entertainment venue since its opening in August 1863. Ironically, just a month before the assassination, Lincoln had attended a performance of Aladdin or His Wonderful Lamp at the same theatre, blissfully unaware of the tragedy that would soon unfold on its stage. As the clock struck 8:30 p.m., President Lincoln, accompanied by his wife Mary Todd Lincoln, Major Henry Rathbone and Clara Harris, entered the presidential box to thunderous applause. The play, a light-hearted comedy called Our American Cousin, had already begun. Lincoln, weary from the burdens of war and reunification, settled into his rocking chair, ready for a brief respite from his presidential duties. It's worth noting that the Lincolns had initially invited General Ulysses S. Grant and his wife to join them, but the Grants declined due to plans to visit their children in New Jersey. This twist of fate would haunt Mrs. Grant for years to come, as she later remarked, "I have always felt that if we had been there, it would not have happened." Unbeknownst to the theatre-goers, a sinister plot was unfolding behind the scenes. John Wilkes Booth, a 26-year-old acclaimed actor and Confederate sympathizer, was making his final preparations. Booth, born into a family of celebrated thespians, had become consumed by his hatred for Lincoln and the Union cause. His original plan to kidnap the president had evolved into a far more nefarious scheme. Booth's family connections in the theatre world had granted him unprecedented access to Ford's Theatre. He had even performed on its stage, most notably as the lead in Shakespeare's Richard III in November 1864. This familiarity with the venue would prove crucial in his deadly mission. At approximately 10:15 p.m., Booth slipped into the unguarded presidential box. With practiced stealth, he aimed his single-shot Derringer pistol at the back of Lincoln's head and pulled the trigger. The crack of the gunshot pierced through the laughter of the audience, momentarily drowned out by the famous line, "Don't know the manners of good society, eh? Well, I guess I know enough to turn you inside out, old gal. You sock-dologizing old man trap," delivered by actor Harry Hawke. The bullet, a .44 caliber lead ball, entered Lincoln's skull behind his left ear, traversed his brain, and lodged just behind his right eye. In a cruel twist of fate, Dr. Charles Taft, who would later attend to Lincoln, recalled that the president had been laughing at the moment the shot was fired. In the chaos that ensued, Booth leapt from the box onto the stage below, shouting, "Sic semper tyrannis," thus always to tyrants, the state motto of Virginia. Despite injuring his leg in the fall, he managed to escape on horseback, leaving behind a scene of utter pandemonium. As he fled, Booth allegedly also cried out, "The South is avenged!" His escape was facilitated by a horse held ready at the rear of the theatre by Joseph Peanuts Burroughs, an unwitting stagehand who had no knowledge of Booth's intentions. Dr. Charles Leal, a 23-year-old army surgeon who happened to be in the audience, rushed to Lincoln's aid. His grim assessment echoed through the ages. "His wound is mortal. It is impossible for him to recover." The president was carried across the street to William Peterson's boarding house, where he would spend his final hours. The house, now known as the Peterson House, still stands today at 516 10th Street NW, preserved as a National Historic Site. In a poignant detail, Lincoln was laid diagonally across a bed too short for his 6'4" frame, his long legs hanging over the edge. As news of the assassination spread like wildfire, the nation plunged into mourning. Secretary of War Edwin M. Stanton, who had rushed to Lincoln's deathbed, famously uttered, "Now he belongs to the ages," as the president drew his last breath at 7:22 a.m. on April 15, 1865. Stanton, who had once been a political rival of Lincoln's, became one of his most loyal supporters and took charge of the situation in the chaotic aftermath of the assassination. He immediately began issuing orders to apprehend Booth and his co-conspirators, declaring, "Let every soldier and citizen keep a vigilant watch." The assassination of Lincoln was not an isolated incident, but part of a broader conspiracy. That same night, Lewis Powell, one of Booth's co-conspirators, attacked Secretary of State William H. Seward in his home, seriously wounding him. Powell, using the alias Lewis Payne, gained entry to Seward's home by claiming to deliver medicine for the secretary, who was recovering from a carriage accident. In a brutal assault, Powell stabbed Seward repeatedly, but the secretary survived thanks to the metal surgical collar he was wearing due to his recent injuries. George Atzerodt, tasked with killing Vice President Andrew Johnson, lost his nerve and fled. He was found days later at his cousin's farm in Maryland, hiding in a barn. The manhunt for Booth and his accomplices was one of the largest in American history. For 12 days, Booth evaded capture, aided by Confederate sympathizers. On April 26th, he was cornered in a Virginia tobacco barn owned by Richard Garrett. Refusing to surrender, Booth was shot by Sergeant Boston Corbett and died shortly after, his last words reportedly being, "Useless, useless." Corbett, an eccentric figure known for his religious fervor, had disobeyed orders to take Booth alive. He later claimed divine inspiration for his actions, stating, "Providence directed me." In the following weeks, 8 conspirators were tried by a military tribunal. 4 were sentenced to death: Lewis Powell, David Herold, George Atzerodt, and Mary Surratt, the first woman to be executed by the federal government. The others received prison sentences of varying lengths. The trial, which began on May 9, 1865, was controversial, with many questioning the use of a military court for civilian defendants. Mary Surratt's execution, in particular, sparked public outcry. Her last words were, "Please don't let me fall," spoken to the guards as they adjusted the noose around her neck. The motivations behind Booth's actions were complex. A fervent believer in the Confederate cause, he saw Lincoln as a tyrant destroying the Southern way of life. In his diary, later recovered, Booth wrote, "Our country owed all her troubles to him, and God simply made me the instrument of his punishment." Booth's hatred for Lincoln had been festering for years. He had attended Lincoln's second inaugural address on March 4, 1865, later writing, "What an excellent chance I had, if I wished, to kill the president on Inauguration Day." The impact of Lincoln's assassination on the aftermath of the Civil War was profound. The president's plans for a lenient Reconstruction were replaced by the more punitive approach of the radical Republicans. Andrew Johnson, who succeeded Lincoln, lacked the political acumen and moral authority to heal the nation's deep wounds. Frederick Douglass, the renowned abolitionist, lamented Lincoln's death, saying, "It was a disaster for the whole country and a misfortune for the whole world." The assassination effectively derailed Lincoln's vision of malice toward none, with charity for all, as outlined in his second inaugural address. The assassination also had far-reaching consequences for the office of the presidency itself. Security measures, previously lax, were significantly tightened. The event marked the beginning of the Secret Service's role in presidential protection, though this would not become their official duty until 1901, following the assassination of President William McKinley. In a twist of historical irony, legislation creating the Secret Service was on Lincoln's desk the night he was assassinated, awaiting his signature. In the years that followed, Lincoln's assassination became deeply ingrained in American culture and mythology. Ford's Theater, which closed immediately after the shooting, was eventually restored and reopened as a National Historic Site in 1968. Today, it stands as a poignant reminder of that fateful night. The chair in which Lincoln was seated during the assassination is now on display at the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan, a silent witness to one of the most pivotal moments in American history. The events of April 14, 1865, continue to captivate historians and the public alike. Countless books, films, and documentaries have explored every aspect of the assassination, from Booth's motivations to conspiracy theories involving high-ranking government officials. One enduring mystery surrounds Booth's diary, which was found on his body after his death. 18 pages were allegedly removed before it was presented as evidence, fueling speculation about a wider conspiracy that continues to this day. Echoes of gunfire in Dealey Plaza, the day America lost its innocence. On November 22, 1963, the warm Texas sun bathed Dallas in a deceptive glow of normalcy. As the gleaming blue 1961 Lincoln Continental convertible, SS-100X, carrying President John F. Kennedy and his wife Jacqueline, wound its way through the city streets, cheering crowds lined the route, eager to catch a glimpse of their charismatic leader. The Kennedys had arrived in Dallas the night before, staying at the Texas Hotel in Fort Worth. That morning, the president had given a speech outside the hotel to a crowd of several thousand, remarking, "There are no faint hearts in Fort Worth." Little did anyone know that in mere moments, the world would change forever. At 12:30 p.m., as the presidential motorcade entered Dealey Plaza, 3 shots rang out in quick succession. The first missed, but the second and third found their mark with devastating precision. Governor John Connally, seated in front of Kennedy, was struck in the chest. The final bullet hit the president in the head, spattering blood and brain matter across the car's interior and onto the pink Chanel suit of a horrified Jacqueline Kennedy. Nellie Connally, the governor's wife, had just turned to Kennedy and said, "Mr. President, you can't say Dallas doesn't love you," when the first shot was fired. The irony of her words would haunt her for years to come. Secret Service agent Clint Hill, riding in the follow-up car, leapt into action. He sprinted towards the presidential vehicle, clambering onto its trunk as it sped away. His desperate attempt to shield the First Lady and the mortally wounded president would become one of the most iconic images of that fateful day. Hill would later recall, "I wish I had been quicker," a sentiment that would torment him for decades. As pandemonium erupted in Dealey Plaza, the presidential limousine raced to Parkland Memorial Hospital. There, in Trauma Room 1, a team of doctors, including Dr. Malcolm Perry and Dr. Charles Crenshaw, fought a losing battle to save the president's life. At 1 p.m., John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States, was pronounced dead. He was 46 years old. In a poignant detail, a Catholic priest, Father Oscar Huber, was summoned to administer last rites, even though Kennedy had already passed. The nation plunged into shock and mourning. Walter Cronkite, the trusted voice of CBS News, struggled to maintain his composure as he delivered the news to a stunned America. From Dallas, Texas, the flash apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago. His voice cracking, Cronkite removed his glasses, a rare display of emotion that mirrored the grief of a nation. This moment would be forever etched in the collective memory of Americans, with many recalling exactly where they were when they heard the news. In the chaotic hours that followed, attention focused on a lone gunman, Lee Harvey Oswald. A 24-year-old former Marine with a troubled past and communist sympathies, Oswald was arrested at 1:50 p.m. at the Texas Theater, less than 90 minutes after the assassination. He was initially detained for the murder of Dallas police officer J.D. Tippit, shot just 45 minutes after Kennedy. Curiously, Oswald had briefly lived in the Soviet Union from 1959 to 1962, adding fuel to later conspiracy theories about foreign involvement in the assassination. But Oswald would never stand trial for his alleged crimes. On November 24th, as he was being transferred from the city jail to the county jail, local nightclub owner Jack Ruby emerged from a crowd of onlookers and fired a single shot into Oswald's abdomen. The shooting was broadcast live on national television, adding another layer of surrealism to an already unbelievable series of events. Oswald died at 1:07 p.m. that day, taking whatever secrets he may have held to his grave. Ruby would later claim he acted out of grief and rage, stating, "I wanted to be a hero. I couldn't help hearing all of the wails and cries." The assassination of President Kennedy sent shockwaves through American society that continue to reverberate to this day. In an attempt to quell rumors and establish a definitive account of the events, President Lyndon B. Johnson appointed the Warren Commission, headed by Chief Justice Earl Warren, on November 29, 1963. The commission included notable figures such as Senator Richard Russell, Representative Gerald Ford, and former CIA Director Allen Dulles. After a 10-month investigation, the Warren Commission concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald had acted alone in assassinating Kennedy. They determined that Oswald had fired 3 shots from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository where he worked. The infamous magic bullet theory, proposed by future Senator Arlen Specter, was put forward to explain how a single bullet could have caused multiple wounds to both Kennedy and Connally. This theory would become one of the most contentious aspects of the official narrative. However, the Commission's findings did little to satisfy a skeptical public. Conspiracy theories began to proliferate almost immediately, ranging from involvement by the CIA or the Mafia to a coup orchestrated by Lyndon Johnson himself. The release of the Zapruder film in 1975, a 26.6-second home movie capturing the assassination in gruesome detail, only fueled further speculation. Abraham Zapruder, a Dallas dressmaker, had unwittingly created the most famous home movie in history, selling the rights to Life magazine for $150,000. One of the most enduring conspiracy theories involves the Grassy Knoll, a small sloping hill to the north of Elm Street in Dealey Plaza. Numerous witnesses, including railroad worker S.M. Holland and police officer Joe Marshall Smith, reported hearing shots from this direction, leading to speculation about a second gunman. The House Select Committee on Assassinations, which reinvestigated the case in the late 1970s, concluded that there was a high probability that 2 gunmen fired at the president, though this finding remains hotly debated. The committee's acoustic analysis, which suggested 4 shots were fired, has been particularly controversial. The assassination's impact on American culture and politics cannot be overstated. It marked the end of an era often referred to as Camelot, named after Kennedy's favorite musical. The youthful optimism of the early 1960s gave way to a more cynical, distrustful attitude towards government and authority. As journalist Theodore H. White wrote in Life magazine shortly after the assassination, "There was a sound of laughter. In a moment it was no more, and so she took a ring from her finger and placed it in his hands. And the flight of the wildest fancy, the dreams of the most cloudy romance, are all exceeded in the last hour of Camelot." This shift in public sentiment was reflected in popular culture. Films like Oliver Stone's JFK 1991 brought conspiracy theories to the mainstream, while countless books, documentaries, and TV shows have explored every aspect of the assassination. The term conspiracy theory itself gained widespread usage in the aftermath of Kennedy's death. Notably, Mark Lane's 1966 book, Rush to Judgment, became a bestseller, challenging the Warren Commission's conclusions and setting the stage for decades of alternative theories. The tragedy also led to significant changes in presidential security protocols. The open-top limousine, once a staple of presidential appearances, became a relic of the past. Secret Service protection was expanded, and the way presidents interact with the public was forever altered. Interestingly, the limousine in which Kennedy was shot, codenamed X-100, was rebuilt and used by Presidents Johnson, Nixon, Ford, and Carter before being retired in 1977. It now resides in the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan. In the decades since that dark day in Dallas, the Kennedy assassination has become a defining moment in American history, a shared trauma that continues to fascinate and perplex in equal measure. The event has spawned an entire industry of books, films, and memorabilia. Researchers and amateur sleuths continue to pore over every detail, from the ballistics evidence to the movements of various individuals in Dealey Plaza that day. Today, Dealey Plaza stands as a somber reminder of that November afternoon. The Texas School Book Depository has been transformed into the 6th floor museum, dedicated to preserving the memory of Kennedy and exploring the circumstances of his death. Visitors can stand at the window from which Oswald allegedly fired his fatal shots, looking down on the X painted on Elm Street that marks the spot where Kennedy was struck. Each year, thousands of tourists visit the site, many leaving flowers or notes at the nearby John F. Kennedy Memorial Plaza. As we approach the 60th anniversary of the assassination, the events of November 22, 1963, continue to captivate the American imagination. The loss of John F. Kennedy remains a wound in the national psyche, a moment when time seemed to stop and the course of history irrevocably changed. In the words of Kennedy himself, spoken in his inaugural address, but hauntingly appropriate in retrospect, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." This call to service, cut short by an assassin's bullet, continues to inspire and challenge Americans today. The legacy of the Kennedy assassination extends far beyond the immediate aftermath. It has shaped American politics, culture, and psychology in profound ways. The event marked the beginning of what some historians call the Long 60s, a period of social and political upheaval that would include the escalation of the Vietnam War, the Civil Rights Movement, and the counterculture revolution. Many Americans trace a line from the hope and optimism of the Kennedy years to the disillusionment and cynicism that followed his death. In the realm of popular culture, the assassination has been the subject of countless works. Don DeLillo's novel Libra, 1988, offers a fictionalized account of Oswald's life, while Stephen King's November 22, 63, 2011, explores the idea of preventing the assassination through time travel. These works, among many others, reflect the enduring fascination with the events of that day and their wider implications. As journalist James Reston wrote in the New York Times on November 23, 1963, "What was killed in Dallas was not only the president, but the promise. The heart of the nation is heavy, its spirit is not lifted." This sentiment continues to resonate, reflecting the sense of lost potential and altered trajectory that many associate with Kennedy's death. Bullets, obsession, and a president's resolve. The day Reagan cheated death. On a crisp spring afternoon in Washington, D.C., March 30, 1981, the air was filled with a sense of optimism. President Ronald Reagan, just 69 days into his presidency, had finished addressing a group of union representatives at the Washington Hilton Hotel. The speech, delivered to the Building and Construction Trades Department of the AFL-CIO, had been well received, with Reagan's characteristic charm and wit on full display. As he stepped out into the sunlight at 2:25 p.m., waving to the crowd gathered along T Street NW, no one could have predicted the chaos that was about to unfold. Reagan, dressed in a dark blue suit and red tie, had just reached for a pen to sign an autograph for a young admirer. At 2:27 p.m., 6 rapid-fire shots rang out, shattering the peaceful scene. In a mere 2 seconds, history took a dramatic turn. John Hinckley Jr., a 25-year-old drifter with a troubled past and an unhealthy obsession with actress Jodie Foster, had emerged from the crowd of onlookers and reporters. Standing just 10 feet away from the president, he opened fire with a .22 caliber Röhm RG-14 revolver, a cheap German-made weapon he had purchased for $29 at a Dallas pawn shop. The first bullet struck White House Press Secretary James Brady in the head, critically wounding him. Brady, who had been standing between Reagan and Hinckley, fell to the ground immediately, his life forever altered. The second hit District of Columbia police officer Thomas Delahanty in the back, causing him to fall and leaving him with permanent nerve damage that would end his police career. The third overshot the president and struck the window of a nearby building, showering glass onto the sidewalk below. The fourth hit Secret Service agent Tim McCarthy in the abdomen as he spread his body to shield the president, an act of heroism that would earn him the NCAA Award of Valor. The fifth bullet hit the bullet-resistant glass of the open door of the president's limousine, a 1972 Lincoln Continental model codenamed Stagecoach. The sixth and final bullet ricocheted off the armored side of the limousine and struck President Reagan under his left arm, grazing a rib and lodging in his lung, stopping less than an inch from his heart. In a twist of fate, had the bullet struck the limousine's frame instead of the bulletproof glass, it might have missed Reagan entirely. This quirk of ballistics would later be referred to as the magic bullet by some commentators, echoing similar discussions about the Kennedy assassination. In the chaos that followed, Secret Service agent Jerry Parr, the head of Reagan's security detail, shoved Reagan into the limousine with such force that one of the president's ribs was cracked. Initially, Reagan believed he had merely injured his rib when Parr pushed him into the car. "Jerry, get off," he complained. "I think you've broken one of my ribs." However, as they sped away from the scene, Reagan began coughing up blood. Parr, making a split-second decision that likely saved the president's life, redirected the limousine to George Washington University Hospital instead of the White House. The hospital, located just over a mile from the shooting site, had been alerted and was preparing for the president's arrival. Upon arrival at the hospital at 2:35 p.m., Reagan, ever the showman, walked into the emergency room under his own power. Observers noted that his face was pale and his knees were buckling, but his wit remained intact. He quipped to his wife, Nancy, who had rushed to the hospital from a luncheon, "Honey, I forgot to duck," echoing boxer Jack Dempsey's famous line to his wife after losing his heavyweight title to Gene Tunney in 1926. To the assembled doctors, he deadpanned, "Please tell me you're all Republicans." The lead surgeon, Dr. Joseph Giordano, a liberal Democrat, responded, "Today, Mr. President, we're all Republicans." This exchange would become one of the most famous quotes associated with the incident, illustrating Reagan's ability to use humor even in dire circumstances. As news of the assassination attempt spread, the nation held its breath. CBS News anchor Walter Cronkite, who had come out of retirement to cover the story, gravely informed viewers, "President Reagan has been shot." Vice President George H.W. Bush was immediately recalled from Texas, where he had been scheduled to address a convention of the United States Cattlemen's Association. Secretary of State Alexander Haig, famously and controversially, declared at a press conference, "I am in control here in the White House," a statement that would be dissected and debated for years to come. Haig's assertion was technically incorrect, as the line of succession placed the Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill, ahead of the Secretary of State. Meanwhile, John Hinckley Jr. was quickly apprehended at the scene by police and Secret Service agents. His motivations, as investigators would soon discover, were as bizarre as they were disturbing. Hinckley had developed an obsession with actress Jodie Foster after seeing her in the 1976 film Taxi Driver. In a twisted attempt to impress her, he decided to assassinate the president, eerily mirroring the plot of the very movie that had sparked his fixation. In the film, Robert De Niro's character plots to assassinate a presidential candidate to impress a young woman played by Foster. Hinckley's path to that fateful day was marked by mental instability and failed aspirations. Born on May 29, 1955, in Ardmore, Oklahoma, into a wealthy oil family, he had drifted through life, dropping out of Texas Tech University and moving from city to city. He had stalked President Jimmy Carter in 1980 and had been arrested in Nashville, Tennessee for carrying firearms. In the months leading up to the assassination attempt, Hinckley had written numerous letters to Foster, who was then a student at Yale University. None of these letters received a response. As Reagan underwent emergency surgery to remove the bullet and repair his collapsed lung, the nation waited anxiously for news. The operation, performed by Dr. Benjamin Aaron, lasted nearly 3 hours, and at one point, Reagan's blood pressure dropped dangerously low. However, true to his reputation as the Teflon president, Reagan's robust constitution and unwavering optimism saw him through. He famously scribbled on a piece of paper, "All in all, I'd rather be in Philadelphia," paraphrasing W.C. Field's famous epitaph. This note, along with others he wrote during his hospital stay, would later be displayed at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library in Simi Valley, California. Reagan's recovery was remarkably swift, a testament to his physical fitness and positive attitude. He was up and working from his hospital bed within days, signing a piece of legislation and meeting with staff members. On April 11th, just 12 days after the shooting, Reagan returned to the White House. His popularity soared in the wake of the assassination attempt, with his approval ratings jumping from 59% to 73%. The image of Reagan walking out of the hospital 13 days after the shooting, waving to the crowds, became an iconic symbol of his presidency and his personal resilience. The aftermath of the assassination attempt brought significant changes to Secret Service protocols. The agency faced criticism for allowing the president to be exposed while walking to his limousine. Jerry Parr, the agent who had saved Reagan's life, later reflected, "In those days we didn't secure the sidewalk or the building across the street. We just didn't think in terms of that." Subsequently, they implemented stricter security measures, including the use of magnetometers to screen all members of the public who would come into proximity with the president. The incident also led to the development of the capture zone, a secure area around the president that is now standard procedure. The incident also had lasting impacts on gun control legislation in the United States. The Brady Bill, named after the severely wounded James Brady, was eventually passed in 1993, mandating federal background checks on firearm purchasers and imposing a 5-day waiting period on purchases. Brady, who was left permanently disabled by his injuries, and his wife Sarah became prominent advocates for gun control. Their efforts led to the creation of the Brady Campaign to prevent gun violence, one of the largest gun control organizations in the United States. John Hinckley Jr. Artest's trial was a media sensation, beginning on May 4, 1982. His defense team, led by Vincent Fuller, argued that he was not guilty by reason of insanity, a plea that was ultimately successful. The trial featured testimony from psychiatric experts and even included a screening of Taxi Driver for the jury. On June 21, 1982, after 7 weeks of testimony and 3 days of deliberation, the jury found Hinckley not guilty by reason of insanity. He was committed to St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Washington, D.C. The verdict sparked public outrage and led to changes in the insanity defense in several states. As a result, many states and the federal government adopted the guilty but mentally ill verdict as an alternative to not guilty by reason of insanity. The assassination attempt had a profound effect on Reagan's presidency. It humanized him in the eyes of many Americans and lent him an aura of invincibility that would persist throughout his 2 terms in office. Reagan himself believed that the incident had been part of God's plan, stating in his autobiography, "Whatever happens now, I owe my life to God and will try to serve him in every way I can." The events of March 30, 1981, also had a significant impact on Reagan's relationship with his wife, Nancy. Already close, the couple grew even closer after the assassination attempt. Nancy became fiercely protective of her husband, taking a more active role in managing his schedule and even consulting an astrologer, Joan Quigley, to help determine the safest times for the president to make public appearances. As the years passed, the events of March 30, 1981, continued to resonate. James Brady, permanently disabled from his wounds, became a prominent advocate for gun control until his death in 2014. His death was ruled a homicide, attributed to the injuries he sustained in 1981, although no further charges were brought against Hinckley. John Hinckley Jr., after decades of treatment and gradual expansions of his freedom, was fully released from psychiatric care in 2016, a decision that reignited debates about mental health, criminal responsibility, and public safety. The assassination attempt also left its mark on popular culture. Books like Rawhide Down by Del Quentin Wilber provided detailed accounts of the day's events. The incident was dramatized in the 2001 Showtime film The Day Reagan Was Shot, starring Richard Dreyfuss as Alexander Haig. It also featured prominently in the 2011 film The Reagan Show, which examined Reagan's presidency through the lens of his media appearances. Today, the assassination attempt on Ronald Reagan stands as a stark reminder of the vulnerabilities inherent in public life and the split-second moments that can alter the course of history. It remains a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the complexities of mental illness, and the enduring impact of a single day's events on a nation's psyche and policies. As Reagan himself reflected years later, "I know it's difficult for people to accept, but I have a special reason for turning to God at this time. I'm convinced that God has spared my life to fulfill some greater purpose." As we close this chapter of history, we're reminded that the tapestry of American leadership is interwoven with threads of both triumph and tragedy. These moments, frozen in time, serve as stark reminders of the fragility of life and the resilience of the American spirit. They've shaped our policies, our culture, and our very understanding of leadership under fire. As we reflect on these pivotal moments, let's remember the words of John F. Kennedy himself, who once said, "A man may die, nations may rise and fall, but an idea lives on." Indeed, the ideals these leaders stood for have outlived the bullets meant to silence them. So, as we bid farewell, let's carry forward the lessons of vigilance, resilience, and hope that these dark chapters of our history have taught us. For in understanding our past, we better shape our future. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the crosshairs of history. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and remember, the course of history often hinges on a single moment.